So the deal is, Jean was the program manager. She was the office manager at KSW the year before we started APAture, and she had gone to, because Jean was a zinester at the time, and she had gone to a youth zine and comics expo at the jail, the city jail. They had it in the lobby of the city jail. She went there and she saw that like about half of the people who were there were Asian American. And she thought, oh my God, we should do an Asian American only zine and comics expo. So she brought it back to KSW and they mulled it over. And then Jean left and I came on. And what happened that year is the previous 17 years, KSW's programming centered around the Asian American Jazz Festival, which was a huge, huge program. And then the 1998 was the last year that KSW presented the Jazz Festival. After that, the Jazz Festival became its own entity, and KSW separated from it. And so all of a sudden in 1999, KSW had a big hole in its schedule at $30,000. And so Jean's Zine and Comics Expo idea came back up, and Nancy and I discussed it in the office, and it sort of evolved into a multidisciplinary expo. We called it the Youth Expo. And then at that point, because we had this KSW group, at that point we brought in the KSW group and said, what do you think about this idea? And the group evolved the idea into APAture.
KSW Next.
It was KSW Next was the next generation group. So yeah, that's how we came up with the idea for APAture.
And the first year it was just a one-day event.
Two.
It was 2 days.
It took us a day to put up the show.
But it was actually two, then we had the film night.
The Thursday night was the film video night, and then Saturday was the main day.
And we filmed Cell Space on Potrero Hill, and just had this, like, all of us mashed together in one room. A zine station, performing art stuff, an art exhibit that was up for
15
like
hours. It was supposed to be a 12-hour day, and it was 15 hours.
It went on forever, and 700 people showed up. Is that right? 700?
700 people. We were like, oh, we're going to get 150, 200
Yeah, we were
people.
expecting us and our
people.
friends to show up, and it was like, people were just like finding out about it and so excited. People that I knew showed up because they'd seen it in something, but they didn't come because I invited them. And you know, and people, they were just so excited, and we thought, oh, we've got to do this bigger next year. And so it became like a 2-week thing, and then it grew. Yeah. It kept growing.
Well, technically it was a 2-week thing, but it was a 2-week thing because the gallery show lasted for 2 weeks.
That's right.
The second year, the rest of it was only two nights. It was one night, 3 nights. 2 nights and a day.
Yeah.
So there was a film night, there was a literary night, and then there was the 12-hour day.
Because it was just that we realized, you know, you can't just put up a gallery show for like 24 hours. That's crazy.
Yeah.
We did it, but it was kind of crazy. So it was really important that we stretch that out and have more opportunities for folks to see the gallery show, since it took so much effort to hang.
So there's Jean Chen. She's the one who came up with the idea.
Yeah, there she
Well,
is.
maybe, I don't know. I feel like it was 20 years ago, and everyone's like, what happened?
Don't show me up here. I just told everybody you came over here.
No, actually, this was really,
20 years ago.
this was my recollection of it. So Pacific News Service had put on like a youth expo thing, which was, I don't know, did anyone else go? And it was basically like, I remember I was there because I had a booth that's like doing
At
zines.
the jail, right?
Hmm?
The jail.
Is it at
No, it was
YGC?
somewhere it was like at a warehouse on a pier. I don't know.
Nancy told me it was.
Okay, no. It was on one of the piers, and then a friend of mine and I were hanging out afterwards. I was working at Kearney Street at the time. We're like, we should do that, but for Asian Americans, and we were just gonna do a zine thing. And then I think when you came on staff, it just became this whole other. Why don't we add visual? Why don't we add music? Well, we might as well add film. What about other, and it just became this whole visual arts. What about that? So it just turned into a lot. And yeah, Cell Space was really crazy and awesome. But then was that at SoMarts the next year?
Yeah,
I remember
SoMarts
that
was
was like
SoMarts the next year.
yeah, 'cause it was so giant.
We got evicted from our space, and we had an office space on South Park, which is ground zero for the .com boom.
Yeah.
And so it was one of the first places that got gentrified, and our landlord got greedy and kicked us out 2 months before the .com crash. So we left the
Stop at fact
space.
number one.
We left the space and moved into SoMarch. Jack Davis was still there, and he took us in, gave us our own space. And because we were there, we were like, well, we might as well do this at SoMarch. And also, Cell Space was the city was locking down a lot of unofficial or semi-official art spaces at the time, which prior to that, the '90s were a great time for art spaces in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And this was the end of the '90s, and the city was really locking down on those and passed all kinds of laws and policies and zoning laws and all of this crap. And so. So Cell Space, all of a sudden, we're like, well, you can do it here again, but you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this. And we were like, okay, well, let's go do it at SoMarch. Yeah,
SoMarch was really good to us.
they were really good to us. Jack Davis was really good to us. Yeah.
I think some of our best years were there. It was great.
Yeah, I think the best years were at SoMarch because it's such a big space. There's so many other communities associated with SoMarch, so
Those were big aperture.
right? So we would
Really
end
big, yeah.
APAture, and then
People there.
the Dia de los Muertos thing would be happening right afterwards.
Right afterwards, yeah.
So there was just this really great synergy of multiple cultures connecting with each other and having the opportunity to see each other's creativity and expression.
Yeah, Renee Yanez started working
Renee.
there.
Oh yeah.
Around that time, and he was just this really quiet presence, always in the background of APAture.
Somehow
And
so huge.
yeah, and a lot of GPC members never met him, never interacted with him, but he was like really, really important in making sure that APAture happened every single year. Yeah. And another reason why the SoMarch years were so great was that we were still tossing everything into one big 12-hour day pot.
Everything in one space.
Yeah, rather than separating it out.
Yeah, because then it's like, say you were really interested in the music, but then you were forced to forced to hang out through the other stuff, or like you had to see the visual arts, right? Because the gallery's right there. So I kind of like that.
And then there would be like a music performance, and then like a performance art piece, and then like a theater piece, and then a spoken word piece, and then a dance, and just one right after the other. And all of the artists actually came up to us afterwards and said, "I'm so glad you did it this way because I never would have met these artists who were not in my discipline, and I just got to meet everybody, and it was so cool."
That was definitely
Yeah.
a huge part of it. For me, a big part of it too, it impacted my teaching a great deal because I would bring my students. They often would volunteer in large groups, and
That's because you required it.
Yeah.
I did.
They came back.
They
on their
came
own.
back. They became staff. They became volunteers consistently for KSW.
They interned for us,
They
yeah.
interned for KSW. They worked as volunteer coordinators. But it also impacted my own teaching because I became really interested in the idea of performance pedagogy, which is what we call that. The idea that like creating something together will create a community. So we actually started to implement that in our Introduction to Asian American Cultures class across the entire, there's like 3 or 4 different sections of that class, each taught by a different professor. But in each class we have the students create a performance, we call it POP, producing our power. Right? It's that idea that creating something together is empowering, and then they actually perform it all together on one night for each other's classes. So it's about 400 students get to see each other performing all in one night, and I was inspired by APAture to do that. It was awesome.
APAture alum at this time. Like, how does that make you guys feel knowing that, I don't know if you saw the quote from Ali Wong, but she's said APAture was the first place she was able to perform stand-up comedy in front of an audience. And that experience, inspired her to keep doing stand-up again and again, and like really propelled her career to where she is today.
And that's
So
what
yeah,
APAture
we-
was for.
We knew that. I mean, it's Ali Wong is probably the most famous, or Hassan Minhaj, but we knew that it had that impact because we started collecting feedback from the artists the second year, and that's what all of the artists say over and over again. APAture is first or early experience for all of these artists, and A lot of them say this is the first time I got to perform in front of an audience, and almost all of them say this is the first time I got to perform in front of such a big audience. And the first time I got to do it with other Asian American artists, the first time I got to do this, the first time I got to do that. Huge impact.
Not only for the artists, but for the curators as well, right? So the
volunteers.
way we started to design it was to create opportunities in a safe space, in an environment where we would be supporting one another, because it is very competitive in the art world, right? So being able to be in a space first where you're supported, you're part of a shared community, you have a shared goal, right? And the name APAture also says all of that, right? Because it's both a window on the art of Asian Pacific Americans, but it's also an opening for Asian Pacific American artists to be able to enter into the art community. And we actually very deliberately tried to make the application format a formal one so that our young artists could get the experience and that they wouldn't be intimidated going from APAture into other arts events where they would have to apply and have to be judged. We tried to give them kind of a safe entrance into that experience.
We also provided trainings both for the curators and for the artists. We would train for the literary night. We did brief trainings for how to read your work, so that we didn't get a lot of this monotone stuff.
Don't talk too fast.
Yeah, and we would bring in, like, Mike Arcega was one of our first trainers. We brought him in the second year to train the visual artists on how to install their work, because they would have to come in and help us install the work, and so on and so forth. So. Yeah,
And I think there was like a young curators program.
I have a little anecdote. So this is my son Milo, and I did tell him about helping to found this group, and I talked about Gene Yang, and he is a fan of Secret Coders, and he was really thrilled to hear that Gene got one of his early starts here. So we're very proud of that. Things that I've accomplished, I feel like it feels like we did this together. It feels like it is, actual evidence that a community coming together to try to put something together actually succeeded. And I do want to say that we didn't necessarily all get along in the beginning. It wasn't like this was all very. There was this like thing about we weren't really friends to start with. No, and
we were just a group of people.
I saw one of the announcements for this saying this tight knit group of people, and like we didn't even start that way. We really had a lot of arguing, and it wasn't easy. So not just Claire. We were all very opinionated. Everybody had their opinions.
That's what artists are.
Yes, that's what art is, right? But we came together for it, and that's, I think it's a great testament to community that we were able to pull this off.
So along with that answer, there's also two questions. So how has KSW and APAture impacted your career? Everything.
You go.
So I was the intern, I guess, for 1999's KSW APAture. I was 21. I was the baby then. And I teach urban planning at a university. So it feels like it should be super far from what I did. I don't do art stuff. I don't do Asian American stuff. And yet, the bones of what I learned at APAture remain with me, right? This idea that you can make community, right? Like, deliberately, even while acknowledging differences and disagreements, that you can, in a space. I think that also the physical space, right? Like, to be together in a physical space matters in a way that, whatever. I like Instagram, I'm trying to understand still, and like, what's Snapchat and TikTok? But the moment of actually being in that space collectively and figuring out that, I had no idea that I was going to be into Jim Choi's installation in the bathroom. Everyone got freaked out because it looked like there was pee everywhere, right? And I was like, I had no idea that I was into an art installation. Right? So
Taking out the toilet, by the way.
So thinking about how the practice of building community, but building community even in the most sort of disparate, like we had all those opinions, we had such different like backgrounds and perspectives, and to come together like physically, but also kind of politically and culturally has, I think, stayed with me through my whole life. And I say that, given that KSW was evicted from South Park, that also probably prompted me to go into urban planning, to think about kind of the spatial implications and the cultural implications of kind of cities. So that's my little spiel. People are like, how did you get into urban planning? I was like, well, there was this festival.
Wow.
I think probably Russell over here was already really well known as an artist before he joined APAture, but the rest of us kind of got us launching point in APAture. Russell, you should tell your story.
What a segue. No, well, I kind of want to jump back to, probably because that embarrasses me. I want to jump back to this question about what this experience with this crew here has continued in my consciousness and my work. You know, after I left San Francisco, I moved up to a idyllic, rural, beautiful area up in Lake County, and it was a retreat center, Harbin Hot Springs. And when I moved there, I kind of was just trying to keep myself planted, but eventually, long story short, they sort of like pushed me into the position of being the poet laureate of Lake County. And there was already an apparatus for that going, but I realized that I was in a real good position to continue organizing with other arts organizations that were still trying to come together in that area. And even though it's a rural area, it still has its progressive edge. And, you know, I contribute that to the pop wine industry. But yeah, they were all interested in the arts. So I was in a very good position to help out people who wanted to achieve a vision of bringing together arts organizations up in that area. And then I skipped over to Nevada City at some point and helped out with the what is it called, the Sierra Poetry Festival, and other arts festivals and literary events. So I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't have this experience with this crew. And for that, I'm really, really grateful. And I know that that work has turned into something really great in those areas as well. These guys rule.
Can I speak to that question?
Yes.
So we're a group of 12 to 15 people thrown together and decided to do something. You talked about the relationships not, you know, we weren't all good friends, and we didn't agree on everything, and so there was a lot of chaos, and I think that was part of my big role in the beginning, was helping the group navigate a lot of chaos.
We got a level head about it.
Nancy was like, man, so-and-so was not talking to so-and-so, so I would sit down with different folks and mediate conversations. And around the time I was in nonprofit management, and I was starting to spin off, and I was starting to do work as an organizational development consultant. That was my interest. And I got a lot of practice mediating conflict with APAture. And at the time, as a new person coming out and taking on some of this new work, professional work, a lot of the first people that hired me didn't know my work because I hadn't done it before, but they got to know me as someone who was part of this community and the work that I did here. And that trust in those relationships actually helped me launch the work that I'm doing now.
And also on the KSW board, yes.
Yeah. A lot of us have served on that board.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I just say something too? So you're probably like, but why would all these people get together and do an arts festival? But in '99, there was a total need for it, and there just wasn't anything. I think it just felt like we just had to do it, because I felt like in '99 there wasn't this. It's not like Ali Wong was, you know, on the big screen, Crazy
There was
Rich
no
Asians.
YouTube.
There was no
Twitter.
There was no Twitter.
And then we had AsianAvenue.com.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think there was like
You
a
know.
little bit of Asian America online, but like two websites.
This is pre-Harold and Kumar, let me just say. This was like pre, I mean,
Way
there
pre.
just wasn't a lot of stuff. This is Fresh Off the Boat wasn't on TV. Yeah, Margaret Cho's All American Girl had been on the air for a bit. It had tanked. Like, yeah, so there just wasn't anything. So I think it was just like, we have to do this.
I think you guys are gonna get awarded.
Oh,
We
okay.
have a breakdown of what we're going to say here.
Yeah, Ernest has,
Ernest, did you
Ernest has
you
coffee.
flagged me on something here? Did you have to ask me? Yeah. hold on.
That was my student.
Yeah, I started before I wasn't like one of those. I wasn't one of those people who was dragged
You
that
were
you forced
dragged
into this or nothing like that. I actually was part of it before. Then I heard she was teaching the class, and I said I should take her class on Asians of Mixed Heritage class. I thought that was just an amazing opportunity just to kind of explore lots of very rich themes about mixed heritage and stuff amongst the Asian American community. But you know, I mean, exactly to the point that everybody else said about the mass media, there really wasn't anything.
There's nothing.
I mean, I'm a filmmaker, so that was why I made
And we
movies.
need those movies, Matt.
We need those movies with lots of cool stuff. But I thought that it was really great that this gave me an opportunity not only to share my work, but also to try to build opportunities for other people to showcase their work, all kinds of work, all kinds of films, not just one kind of thing. Because we were a very just diverse group as is. Anyway, they're gonna tear us off here. We gotta go.